his 16-year sentence that's only just happened in the last half hour or so. Back to the election now, and to the relief of many Australians, the election advertising blackout took effect as of midnight last night, with the Liberal Party spending 37% of their total advertising budget in the final 3 days. The Palmer United Party was another to have a late spending splurge. On the other hand, Labor pulled back on its advertising. Richard Basil-Jones is the Managing Director of Ebiquity's Advertising Intelligence Asia Pacific Department, and he joins me now in the studio. Richard Basil-Jones, welcome. First of all, just roughly, can you give us an idea of how much each of the major parties has spent through this campaign?
Yeah, well, just talking about television on the 5 major cities, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Adelaide, Perth, for the primary channels, the Labor Party has spent around $3 million and the Liberal Party closer to $5.5 million.
Right. And is that roughly what you would have expected compared to previous elections, or is it a lot more or a lot less?
Look, it's similar, but I think the interesting point this time round is that the Labor Party has spent about half the amount of money on the television across those 5 cities as they did in 2010, whereas the Liberal Party has spent about 15% more. So there's been a big change in the volume and the activity for both those parties in this election versus the last election.
Would that have had anything to do with maybe Labor funneling more money towards other types of advertising?
Yeah, look, we've been monitoring press and radio as well, and there hasn't been any disproportionate spend in those areas. The Labor Party did use radio across the 5 weeks, whereas the Liberal Party didn't actually touch radio for the first few weeks and really picked it up in the last couple of weeks. So not a great deal of difference in those areas. But it's certainly, there has been a different voice and different pattern of the way in which they spent their money.
Just sticking on for the moment on the amount of spend, have you had a look at Clive Palmer as well? Because he's come into focus in the last couple of days, and a lot of people are saying that he's been really hitting the advertising.
Yes, he has. He's almost held everything back for the final 2 weeks. I mean, almost 95% of his campaign spend has been in these last 2 weeks, and realistically it's the last 5 days where he's actually thrown a lot of money at it. And he's spent $1 million very quickly in the course of a week. So he's held right back to the last moment.
So he's spent a third of what the Labor Party has spent in his campaign.
He has. He has, yeah, quite incredible.
And what about Bob Katter as well? Have you taken a look at him or not really?
Yeah, no, I don't have any figures for Bob Katter, I'm sorry.
Have you had a look at his ad?
Yeah, yes, I have.
It's appealing to his demographic.
Look, we love advertising. That's the business we're in. We love it. And there's, you get plenty of laughs from plenty of the advertising as well.
Have you got any sense of how much of an effort has been made with the online advertising? Because I've noticed on social media you get things popping up from the Liberal Party and the Labor Party.
Yeah, and look, that activity's really picked up, certainly in the last week and two. And we do know that from midnight last night, when the blackout occurs for radio and TV, there's a huge amount of effort now going into the online space, which isn't subjected to that blackout. Okay. And we're going to see a lot of activity, advertising activity and social media activity today, tomorrow, and right up to right through Saturday.
Do you find that a bit of an anachronism now, that you can't advertise on some forms of media and yet you can on others?
Yeah, no, look, I think the Australian Communications Media Authority will probably have a think and a look at that particular area. It is a little strange. I know the intent was to create a cooling off period for people to have some time to think about things and not be bombarded by advertising. I think today's world's very different. And I think the online space really will swamp people. And look, even outside using my mobile phone on Facebook, there's an ad popped up for the Labor Party.
So do you think in future, like at the next election, we may not have this blackout rule?
Well, it's going to be one or the other. I think they're going to have to change or modify the rules. I mean, it's either really a blackout...
To bring in social media under that same rule.
Yeah, exactly right.
Now, have you split it between positive and negative advertising and the proportion that each of the party has used?
Yes, we have. And that was very sort of a topical at the very start of the campaign, the negativity that was possibly being portrayed. And we found, interestingly enough, there was 28 different campaigns, different advertising campaigns that the Labor Party used. Of those... almost 75% of them were actually negative, and 25% were positive, and they actually spent their money in that same very similar proportion. Whereas the Liberal Party had about 23 different campaigns, and of those 23, about 70% were actually positive, 30% were negative, but their weighting, how much they spent behind those different campaigns, was about 50-50. Right. It was pretty even.
What do you make of the arguments by the parties that it's not negative campaigning, that they're simply focusing on policy areas?
Yeah, well, look, I think that's fair comment. I mean, look, when you're in opposition, you've got the opportunity to look at performance of government that's been there for 3 years or 5 years or 6 years or whatever it might be. So from an opposition's point of view, you've probably got more fodder to work with regard to creating campaigns around failure or where they haven't delivered. Probably a little bit harder for a government, to be honest with you, where an opposition is an opposition, not in government, haven't dropped the ball with regard to performance because they haven't put in place anything.
But based on what you're saying there, we've got an inverse situation.
We have exactly an inverse, and yeah, exactly right.
Yeah. So, whose campaigns do you think have been more effective? For just looking at the advertising, do you make a call on that?
Well, yeah. Look, it's difficult to call. I mean, what we have seen is the Liberal Party, the Captain Chaos, and as well as the that particular and Our Plan. Those two campaigns, they've been given equal weight, and they've been the two lead campaigns for the Liberal Party. On the Labor side, a little different, obviously. They've the You Lose. They've really pushed that negative campaign pretty hard, and they've outspent 2 to 1 on their next campaign. So they've really pushed that message hard.
I thought I haven't seen a hell of a lot of commercial TV over the last 4 weeks, but I'm surprised that I haven't seen more of former ministers criticising Kevin Rudd. The expectation was going into this campaign that the Liberal Party would be able to slab a whole heap of those criticisms together and just run with them. Did they use them as much as you expected?
No, look, they didn't. From my expectation, the answer is no.
Yeah.
And in actual fact, I think there was a little bit of YouTube. There was a particular clip that was used in the very, very start of the campaign where they pulled together some of those montages, as you described, but not used in the main media and the main advertising campaign. I think it's possible and fair to say that we expected the Liberal Party to probably grab more of that. But the Captain Chaos, they've used that to a large degree as well.
Yeah. Why do you think they pulled back on using those montages, though, that they didn't want to seem too negative, or it was too obvious a ploy? Or
yeah, look, I think they've got to try and balance themselves by positioning themselves not too negative as well, and so you've got to try and create that balance, and so they've got to make sure the voting public don't react too badly to too much negativity as well when they're portraying it.
So you've had a look at a few campaigns over the years. As an overall view of how this campaign has gone, would you think there's anything that sticks out in terms of trends?
Yeah, look, I think the negativity, I think that's been an interesting part in this campaign.
But there's always been negativity.
Yeah, there have, but it's been a real focus around it, and there's been a lot of effort around it as well, more so than in the past. And I think the other part too is that we've really seen in both parties using the figureheads for the actual parties themselves, and we're seeing very little of other ministers in those commercials, where in the past you have seen different ministers appear in the commercials. Yes, we've seen a Joe Hockey, but we tend not to have seen anyone else in those advertisements apart from the leaders themselves.
And do you think that's the influence of the US creeping into Australia?
I think so, I do. And I think, even the launch campaigns, the August 25 for the Liberals and September 1 for the Labor, they seem to have more of an American feel to them.
Yeah. Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing? Or
well, it's only a personal thing. I like the fact that we have a 5-week campaign and we get on with it. I think that's a very healthy process in Australia.
It keeps everyone sane.
I'm happy with the way it is right now.
Okay, Richard Basil-Jones, thanks for coming in.